Hello and thanks for joining me today. So in this video, I'll be showing you how to use your We Are Memory Keeper's pocket punch board to create custom size pockets. So if you're not familiar with this board, it actually creates two different styles of pockets, and I have them both here. They haven't been assembled though. So the first size is the notch style, and it remains open at the top and it's sealed at the bottom. So these are sort of similar to your kind of policy envelopes. And I got these because I think they would be really fun to put into mini albums and have little places to tuck more photo mats in or embellishment pieces or tags. The other style of pocket is it has a flap at the top to seal the pocket closed if you'd like. So those are the two styles of pockets that you can make using the punch board. And there is a handy guide that has a fair number of different pocket sizes that you can create, ranging from 1 3/4 inch square all the way up to 4 1/4 by 6 1/4. And the guide will tell you where to put these little pegs and the size paper you need to cut in order to create pockets in both of those styles. So when I first got this, the first project I wanted to create was actually a little mini album. And in fact, I'm going to be making 5 of these for each of my nieces. And what I wanted was to actually use the pockets as pages and then decorate them using papers and ephemera from Spellbinders card kits. So this is an old card kit. I think it's called Celebrate. And I wanted to be able to fit 3x4 photos on each page and then still have a bit of mat and layers so that you could see the decorative pattern paper, but then you also get the solid color of the page base as well. So ultimately I determined that the page size or pocket size is 3.5 by 5. That's what I wanted. However, 3.5 by 5 is not one of the pocket sizes that is available on this handy dandy guide. So I set about figuring out how to create a custom pocket, and that's what I'll be showing you in this video. I am going to start by just showing you how to make the standard pocket so that if you're not familiar with this board, we'll use that as a foundation, but it'll also help me illustrate how I determined both the paper size that I need to cut and the peg locations for making a custom size pocket. And also I just wanted to mention that this is the first of 5 that I'm creating, and so the next one that I create, I'll shoot a tutorial and process video for that so that you can see how to make one of these. It's a really quick project, especially using the Spellbinders card kits, because you've got the solid papers, you've got pattern papers, plus lots of ephemera to decorate your albums with. Okay, so I am going to start with, I've already cut down, this is just copy paper, and I've cut it down to 8 by 6 3/4 with the intention of making a notched style envelope that is 3 3/4 by 5 3/4. And normally what you would probably do is, find the pocket size that you want, and that line is going to tell you where your peg locations are going to be, and in this case, E3 is where we're going to place this, and then the size of paper you need to cut down. And this column here, the first set of dimensions, is for the style of pocket that has a flap, and then the last column is the size of pocket that is open and has the notch at the top, and that's what we'll be creating. So it has 8 by 6 3/4, so that's what I have here. If you read the instructions, it'll let you know that the long side of your paper will always rest at the top. So just bear that in mind. Anytime we do any cutting or scoring, we're always going to have the long side at the top. The punch board itself comes with a score tool and a cutter, a notcher, and then you can pull these out and they will extend the scoring track. So once you have everything sort of set up, we want to make sure that our pegs go into the right locations based on what we found in our guide. So I think I said E3. Yeah. So up at the top here, you have 1, 2, and 3. And these little pegs, they do have an arrow that is etched into the plastic. You want to make sure that the arrow will point, this one points down towards your score line. You just want the arrows to always point towards your score line. The one on the side needs to point to the right towards your score line. And note that these pegs they can go in the reverse, and I've done that before, and you get a pocket that is, you'll still get a pocket, it's just not going to be the size that you want it. It'll be a little bit smaller. So you want to make sure that your arrow points towards your score line. So the side arrow is going to point to the right, and we want E here. This goes from A to F. So we've got E3. It's kind of like Battleship. So E3. Now that we have that in place, remember the long side of your paper is always going to rest up against the top. And we want to go flush to the top and to the left peg. So just make sure those are nice and straight. Then you can drop this guide down, and this, if you're familiar with some of the other punch boards, there's a round plastic disc, and then your blade is on the other end. The round plastic disc will go into the guide track here, and then the blade there's actually a sort of cutting channel that the blade can cut into. So we're going to go ahead and make that cut. And what I like to do is, still holding on to my paper, I just like to lift this up and score at the same time. It's a little bit easier for me to cut right after scoring, or score right after cutting, because then my paper, I know, is going to be in the exact location of where I scored, where I cut. And I did run off at the bottom a little bit, so if that happens, you can always take this to a scoreboard with longer lines and then score the rest of it. So for a pocket that has a notch, and for the pocket that has a flap, this is how you would start. You would just score that first line, or cut that first corner, score your 2 lines, then flip your paper over to the back side, and that same edge that was lined up against the top, you want to line that back up against the top and cut out the opposite corner. So cut that out. And again, just score. Still holding on to your paper, just go ahead and score down. So because I came to the end of the track, I'm just gonna slide this up a little bit and score the rest of the way down. And I'm gonna do that on the other side too. I'm just gonna rest this against my right peg and score the rest of the way down. So now we have score lines on 3 sides of our paper. If you were making the other style of pocket that has a flap at the top as well, you would start with a larger piece of paper to make the same size pocket. And what we just did on this end, you would just repeat that on the opposite end. So that's why I'm not going to show it, because the steps are pretty repetitive. And for my mini albums, I used the notch style pocket so that I could have a little, each of my page bases would be pocket pages. And that way I can put, my plan is to stuff the pocket pages with ephemera and stickers and things like that, so that the girls can actually decorate the pages themselves. And not only will it be a little mini album flipbook for them, but it's also an activity for them to do. And you know, they're still going to school online and having to stay in most of the time, so I'm sure my brother and his wife will appreciate anything that keeps the girls busy. Okay, so once you have your pocket created, all I did was just fold on the lines that we scored, on the 3 lines that we scored. Now we can bring, sorry for that, now we can bring our pocket to the notch at the top. So I just turned this around, and this end of your punch board actually has grooves, and they are labeled A through F, and they correspond to the peg that we used on the side, the letter peg that we used on the side. And so if you just line up your pocket so that on both sides it meets up with that letter, then you know you're going to be punching a notch that is centered. So we just punch, and then that gives us a little thumb notch at the top. And that just makes it easier when you have stuff in here to pull things out of it. So that's our basic pocket. And to figure out how to create a custom size pocket, basically I needed to figure out, well, how do I determine where these pegs go and what size paper I need to start with in order to get the pocket that I want. So let me go ahead and mark up this paper to show you the dimensions that I was able to figure out. So let's say from this score line to this score line, that's going to be the width of the pocket that we want. From the top here all the way down to our score line at the bottom will be the height of the pocket that we want. So in my case, I want a pocket that's going to be in this direction, the width 3.5 inches, and I want for my width, and I want the height to be 5 inches. So that's the size pocket that I am trying to make. And now we need to figure out where do these score lines go? And because that is clearly where our pegs are placed, and what size paper do we need to cut? Well, here's one of the things that I figured out. The peg at the top, the 1, 2, 3, that is actually going to determine the height of the flap. And as it turns out, 1 is equal to a 1/2 inch flap, 2 is equal to a 3/4 inch flap, and 3 is equal to a 1 inch flap. So how I determined that was I basically just measured from the edge of the peg down to the score line. And that's what I was able to find out. So if we look here, this pocket was at peg number 3. So you can see here, it's a 1 inch flap. So in my case, I think 1 inch might be, more than I need. And so I think I just want a 3/4 inch flap. So my paper that I'm going to start off with is just going to be the height that I want plus the height of the flap that I want. So I'll make some notes here. So our paper size, the height of our paper is going to be the height plus the flap. So in my case, my height of the desired pocket size is 5 inches, and I want a 3/4 inch tall flap. So that's going to be 5 3/4 high. So we have one dimension. Now, and we also have one peg location. So this is going to be at peg number 2 for the top, because peg number 2 correlates to a 3/4 inch tall flap. Okay, so we've got one dimension figured out. Now we need to figure out this dimension of our paper and where our peg goes on the side. So doing the exact same thing as before, I put the peg into each of these letter locations, and I measured from the peg to the score line just to understand, what is this width, that because that's what it's scoring. So we had this at E. So the score line goes here. This is flush against the peg. And so what I wanted to measure was this, because it appears as though this peg location is going to determine the width of this flap. So here's what I found when I did all of that measuring. So the side folds, or the sides of our pocket, A correlates to 1 1/8 inch, and it goes all the way down to F, and it increases by 1/4 inch at each step. So it goes from 1 1/8 all the way up to 2 3/8. So that's going to be useful because now I know, okay, I know which letter corresponds to the size flap that I need. But then how do I determine what I need? Well, let's look at how this pocket is constructed. When you fold down the 2 flaps, it covers the entire width of my pocket, plus it overlaps by about 1/2 inch. And that's what I measured that to be. So you can see the two ends overlap by about 1/2 inch. So if we take a look at our template here, essentially we want each of these flaps to be half of the entire width, and because they overlap by 1/2 inch here, if we want our 2 flaps to be the same width, then we want to split that 1/2 inch so that 1/4 of it is on this side and 1/4 of it is on this side. So if I'm trying to figure out the width of my flap here, what I want to do is take half of the width of the pocket, and then I want to add 1/4 inch. And so in my case, what that's going to end up being is half of 3 1/2 is 1 3/4, plus 1/4 inch is going to be 2 inches. So I want a 2 inch flap here. I want 3 1/2 inch wide pocket, and then I want a 2 inch flap on this side. So in total, my paper is going to actually end up being, what the math works out to, is 2 times the width of our pocket plus that extra 1/2 inch overlap. And so in my case, that's going to be 2 times 3 1/2, which is 7, plus 1/2, So my paper size is going to be 7.5 inches wide. So now I need to figure out my peg location. So if my flap is 2 inches wide, then I need to find a peg that's going to score a line that's 2 inches in from the edge of this paper. So let's look at my cheat sheet here. Here's each of the peg locations, A through F, and how far in they score. And you'll notice none of these equals 2 inches. And that is why a 3.5 by 5 inch pocket is not in the handy dandy pocket guide that comes with the scoreboard, because there is no peg location that will score a 2-inch flap for you. But here's what I noticed. So if I look at D, it's 7 1/8. It's 1 7/8. Sorry, 1 7/8 inch. So that's only 1/8 inch shy of the 2-inch score line that I need. And then if I look on E, it's 2 1/8. So that's only 1/8 inch bigger than what I need. But if you combine the two, you still get effectively 4 inches combined between the two flaps. So basically, instead of this flap being 2 inches, it's going to be 1 7/8, and I'm going to make up for that by making this one on this side 2 1/8. So I'm going to take the 1/8 from here and put it over there, basically. And that's how I'm going to achieve a pocket that is the width that I want. So I haven't tried this with other dimensions yet. This is the first custom size pocket. So like I mentioned at the beginning, there may be some limitations. You may not always be able to find something that is, close enough so that you can maybe nudge a little bit this way, nudge a little bit that way, but effectively still be able to get what you want. So in my case, since we needed 2, but we don't have a 2-inch, I'm going to take the 1 7/8 D. So this is going to be, in terms of my peg, I'm going to use D. And on the other side, I'm going to use E. So instead of using one peg location to cut both sides, I'm going to use D on one side and I'm going to use E on the other side. So let me show you this in action, and we'll see if we get I already know we'll get the pocket size that we want because I've already created at least one album, but I'll show you how that works. So let me grab a piece of paper, and actually let me grab a sheet that I'll actually use for one of my next albums, just so that I can be one pocket done. Okay, so here is my the cardstock that I want to use. I'm going to reference this. So my paper I want to be 5 3/4 by 7.5. So let me go ahead and cut down this sheet. 5 3/4, 7.5. Okay, so I have a piece that is cut down to 5 3/4 by 7.5. I'm gonna just want to double check all of that. Okay. And the same rules apply in terms of placement. You want the widest, the longest stretch of your paper to sit at the top. We said we wanted peg 2, so I'm going to move this down, making sure that the arrow points towards my score line, in this case, down. So peg 2. And then on the side here, we want peg D and peg E. So it's already in E, so I'll just do the E first. Okay, so we want flush at the, and then everything is the same in terms of cutting and scoring. So I'm gonna make sure this is nice and flush against the top and the side. Put the cutting arm down, the round peg into the cutting track, and the blade just swivels around and cuts off that corner. And then I'll go ahead and score across the top, score down the side. And you know what's nice about this one is they've given you sort of dashed groove lines so you know where to start, since your paper blocks the scoring track here, but they've given you dashed lines that are also indented in so you know where to start, which is really nice. Okay, so that was E, and we had worked out that we want one side to be E and the other side to be D. So I'm going to take my peg again, making sure that the arrow points towards my score line, in this case to the right, and I'm going to put this in D, and I'm going to flip this over to the other side. So same as before, that same side that was at the top before, it's still at the top now. And we're just going to cut out on the opposite side, this same curve. So flush to the top, flush to the left, cutting arm down, and you can cut either way. The blade is sharp on both sides, so whatever is most comfortable. And then score. So we've got everything scored and trimmed, and so now let's fold it. And I like to, when I fold, just want to make sure that this is flush right here, and burnish. And normally I would actually take this to my scoreboard and score it on the side that I want to bend down, because generally your paper will be stronger that way. You want to score your fold lines as mountain folds, but for the sake of video, I won't do that. And then we score our bottom, or fold our bottom tab in. And there is our pocket, and then you would notch it. I'm not going to notch this because I found that initially when I did my first album, I cut my pocket, I notched it, and then I figured out how to cut my pattern paper and how to notch it so that it would fit nicely and still have that edge of the solid paper across the top. And so I punched everything separately. So the pocket was punched, and then the two pattern papers were punched separately, because I wasn't sure if the notch punch here could punch through 2 layers of cardstock plus 2 layers of pattern paper. And I tried it out on my second book, which I've started, but I haven't completed, and it actually punches through just fine. So if you're going to decorate your pocket and you want to just really make sure that this is exactly even and flush and just a little bit less work, you can go ahead and decorate your pockets and punch the whole thing at the same time. I will say though that the cardstock that comes in the Spellbinders kits, they feel like they might be around 80 pound. I think they're a little bit more than 60, 65. I think they're 80 pound, but they're not into the 100 pound weight. It's either going to be 65 or 80 pound. And then the pattern papers that are provided in the kit, they are paper weight. They're not like a card weight. See, that's the pattern paper. So basically, I just want to mention that just to let you know the paper weights that I'm using and what I was able to punch through. I did have to put a little bit of weight into it when I punched it, and I don't know if I'm just going to be wearing down my punch a lot faster, but it made it through without too much trouble. So I'm not going to punch this yet because I'll actually use this in one of my albums, but you can see that it's the exact same size as my previous ones, and I can even measure it to show that we got our desired pocket size. So 3.5 by 5. So a little bit of extra work, to figure out how to determine the peg locations and how to determine your paper size. And I haven't done this enough times to know what all the limitations are, but if you want to try this out, if there's a pocket size that you want to create that you don't see in the guide, here's one method of determining your paper size and peg locations to see if you can create a custom pocket. So just to quickly reiterate, your paper size is going to essentially be the height of the pocket that you want to create plus the height of the flap that you want. If you're creating this style, you just add the height of the flap. If you want the style that has a flap that folds over, just multiply this height by 2 and add that to the height of your pocket, because you're going to basically make the exact same cuts and score lines not only at the bottom but at the top. So that's the only difference for the tab style of pocket. Then to determine the width, you want to essentially take the width of your pocket, multiply that by 2, and add that 1/2 inch overlap. So that's going to be the size paper that you cut. Now to determine the peg locations, I just use this little cheat sheet that I shared, and it's this size because I can keep it with the pocket guide in the little envelope that it comes with and keep it right in with my punch board. So maybe make yourself a little cheat sheet like this as well, so that you can, if you're interested in making a custom size pocket, you'll have this handy. So the number or the top peg is going to be either 1, 2, or 3, and those are going to be your options for the height of the flap: 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, or 1 inch. Then the side peg that is letters A through F, that's going to determine the width of your flap. And to figure that out, we just take the width of the pocket that we want, divide that by 2, so 1/2 of your width, and then add 1/4 inch. And then find the closest letter that will match. And you're likely going to need to do a combination of pegs like I did. So in my case, I needed to use peg D and peg E. But combined, D and E, if I add those two numbers up, they equal my 2 flaps in terms of the desired flap width of the flap. So that's how I know it's still going to overlap enough to seal my pocket. So I hope that this was useful. I know it's a little bit complicated, may not be worth it to try, but I wanted to figure it out because I was looking for a very specific size. I tried out a couple of different ones that do come, in the guide, and that's where these are from. They were just my test pockets, and they just weren't the size that I wanted, and so I wanted to figure out how to make a pocket exactly what I wanted. And I find that figuring this out, just like the custom size boxes for the 1, 2, 3 punch board that I created earlier, it just really makes me appreciate the punch board so much more, because now I know that I'm not limited to the sizes that are in the guide, but rather I have a lot more freedom to create exactly the size pocket that that I want, and that way I don't feel like I am just limited to what they can offer, but rather, you know, can really customize this to my project. So I hope that that made sense, and if it didn't, you know, don't hesitate to pop a comment and ask me questions. If there's anything that I can explain more clearly, I'll try to do that, and I'll if I need to do another video to explain some more, I'm happy to do that as well. But hopefully you find this useful. This is how I store things, because this can slide out, so I just put a little bit of tape here. So if you're interested in seeing how I construct these mini albums, I'll link to that video at the end of this one, and you can see me put together one of the mini albums that I still have to make. So thanks so much for joining me, and until my next video, happy crafting and have a fantastic day. Bye.